ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another blacksmithing video. Now, I know what you're thinking, this is a very strange setting for the start of a blacksmithing video. Well, the reason for that is they're doing some road resurfacing outside, so if I recorded this explanation outside, it would be noisy, and I'm always a bit self-conscious of the fact that, you know, I'm sitting there on my front drive with a forge, with a camera, talking about a knife to a camera, which is a little strange, I must admit. So it's probably a lot better to do this in here. Oh, and I'm not trying to keep it classy or anything. I've literally just got in from school. Just done an AS exam, so I thought, you know, do a bit of something to relieve a bit of stress after that, do a bit of blacksmithing. So this is what we were left with at the end of the last video. So we're almost there. We've done all the forging that needs to be done. And what we're going to be doing in this video is the heat treating. Now, heat treating. Heat treating is a source of God knows how many myths about blacksmithing. And yeah, there's lots of talk of magical quenchants and stuff like this, but I'll try and explain it briefly. Heat treating has three processes, normally anyway: normalizing, hardening, and tempering. There's also annealing, which we've already done beforehand. The confusion starts because back in the day, many years ago, they used to call the whole heat treating process tempering. So lots of people don't really know what tempering means, and they talk about things like hardness and strength and stuff interchangeably. Basically, okay, I'll start with annealing, because we've done that already. Annealing is where you heat the blade up and you cool it very slowly in ash. That softens it. Okay, so you want a soft blade so you can file it or grind it or whatever. That's simple enough. The second process, which is what we're going to be doing today, the start of it anyway, is normalizing. Now, normalizing is done because basically, you know, this has been forged, it's been hit with a hammer, it's been all sorts done to it. There's all sorts of internal stress, and different bits are harder than other bits in here, and that's bad because when you go to harden it, lots of blades are lost in the hardening process because you get warpage. So, normalizing is a process we do to minimise warping by relieving all the stress in the steel, and this is done by simply heating it up to cherry red, the whole thing, taking it out and just letting it cool naturally in the air. Only takes a few seconds, and that just relieves all the internal stress, so you're less likely to lose the blade in the hardening. Now, the hardening is the quintessential blacksmithing process. It's one that everybody has at least seen on TV or something, and that is when we heat it up to a cherry red, we take it out and we quench it. Now, what do we quench it in? Basically, the principle is, the quicker the metal cools, the harder it becomes. Now, if you've got a very high carbon steel, like 1095, and you quench it in something like water, it's going to get too hard too quick and crack. So, for higher carbon steel such as this, we use a slower quenching. I use oil, normal vegetable oil, that sort of thing. Now, if you're using a really high carbon steel like 1095, it's advisable to preheat the oil, so it cools down a bit slower. But with this, which is 0.6% carbon, we can get away with using cold oil. Now, this is where you hear all sorts of things. Obviously, you know, before the science came in the metallurgy and we discovered, you know, why metal does what it does, you can imagine how mystical this process would have been, because, you know, you've got it's just you know, an average bit of steel shaped like a knife or a sword, and suddenly you quench it and it becomes, it either breaks, it hardens into a useful tool, or it doesn't. And this is where a lot of the mysticism comes from, because back then nobody knew why it did that, and you used to have things like quenching in, you know, the urine of a teenage redhead or something along those lines. You know, they had crazy things they used to do because it worked, and people, you know, a master would say that to the apprentice, and the apprentice would just carry on doing it. and they'd be convinced that the urine of a teenage redhead is the best quenching medium, or you know, urine was quite a common one, believe it or not. And the reason for that is because it's brine, and brine, salt water, is a very fast quenchant, and that can turn quite lower carbon steels very hard. You can actually turn some mild steels hard. So, and you also hear of things like quenching in blood and stuff, which, you know, varied results. But, you know, back then you didn't know. You know, you think that, you know, quenching it in someone's blood gives it more power. Now I'm gonna just, nobody ever, you know, heats up a knife to red hot and then quenched it by stabbing it into someone. That doesn't work. Partly because the thing would just bend beyond all recognition. It just doesn't work. But there were all sorts of crazy stuff which people quenched in. But now we know why we quench it in different mediums. We can decide on the best medium to quench in. Okay, and I'll be doing for this oil. Anyway, bit of a digression. The final process is tempering. When you harden something, it becomes very hard, brittle. Believe it or not, hardness, a lot of people think, you know, the harder the blade, the better it is. No. In fact, the real advantage of hardness is that it gets blunt slower. There really isn't a whole lot of advantage of having a really hard blade. As long as it's hardened, it doesn't particularly matter how hard it is. It just varies on how much you need to sharpen the thing. But when I harden this, I could drop it on the floor and it'd probably shatter into lots of tiny pieces like glass. Which, also a point, glass is a very, very hard material and very sharp. But we don't use it for blades because it's too brittle, and that's exactly why we don't use simple hardened steel. So tempering is relieving some of the stress. We sacrifice a little bit of hardness for more flexibility and reduce the brittleness. And we do this by generally, you can do it in a lot of ways, but you just heat it up to a kind of lower temperature. You know when you might see on your toaster, if it's got a metal rim on it, it might turn brown or even blue when it gets hot. That's tempering. Blue, basically the hotter you temper it, the softer it gets. So we heat it up, and I mentioned all about differential tempering in the last video, so I won't go into that. But basically we're going to soften the blade a bit, which makes it stronger and more tough, which is especially important for a chopping blade like this. Now, a chopping blade like this, I'm going to temper the same as I would an axe. I'm going to temper it to a brown, which is slightly softer than a normal knife, but it gives you more toughness. So when you're going hand, it's not going to fail on your chip or anything, which is quite important. So, okay, enough of this. We're going to get out there on the forge. I'm going to get changed first, believe it or not, and then we're going to get out there on the forge, and we're going to harden this thing. Yeah. And the other things as well. We're going to do those too. Okay, so now it's normalised, hard now. Now this is where, you know, the entirety, all the work we've done up to now could be wasted, and this could crack in two if we're unlucky, so fingers crossed. It's important at this stage to make sure the blade's heated entirely evenly and up to a cherry red temperature until it's non-magnetic. That's the critical temperature. That's the Zura High stuff right there. And I do believe we've been fortunate. There doesn't seem to be any real warpage on the blade at all. Okay, looks like the gods have been spying on us, because here we are, it's hardened and there's no warpage to speak of. There's obviously a tiny bit on the edge that will be corrected when we do the final grinding. Now we've got to act fast, because basically what we have here is a very, very, very hard and brittle blade. It's full of internal stress and it could crack under a minimal amount of pressure. So we want to temper it as fast as we can. So first of all, I need to clean up so I can see the colours of the blade when I go to temper it. So I'm going to do that. So use the wire wheel and the grinder. So set this up so you can actually see it. It's only a brief clean up, I'm not doing any finishing. By the sound the grinder makes it's dead hard. You can also do a file test to check that it's hard. You do that just by getting a file and running it over, and as you can see it doesn't really scratch it or anything, and it makes a kind of a very different noise to if I get a piece of mild steel or unhardened steel. That's the noise that makes, and you can see how easily it makes the marks, whereas here you've got a much higher pitch noise and it just skips over the surface rather than actually scratching it. So we're going to go ahead and temper it, and this is a very difficult process. And I'm going to use the heat of the forge until I see the colours run to the temperature I want. So I'm going to get it in like this. Spine back of the blade first to get the differential temper, and I'm going to pop this out and probably switch it to 12 volts so it's on the lowest possible air blast. You can do this in the oven as well if you want a single kind of temper, but I want a differential temper. Okay, so it's already in half blast because I've popped the bung out, and now I'm switching blower to 12 volts, so we'll be on a very minimal air blast, as you can see. So you can also do this by heating up a piece of metal and then putting this on top, but this is just as easy. And I'm very carefully watching the bit that I ground to watch the colours, and as soon as it turns the colour I want and the colours run, I've got to take it over and quench it to stop the tempering process, otherwise it will go too soft. I'm going to move it up and down to make sure it's a nice even temper. If I temper it too much, I'll have to harden it all over again. So I can see it turning straw yellow. Needs more at the back here. Okay, it's pretty much there. Okay, quickly got to quench it now. Okay, I'll try and show you the colours in a sec, but I've got a feeling that the colours aren't going to show on the camera too well, but I'll give it a go. Right, okay, so I'm almost certain these colours aren't going to show properly. But no, I don't think they are. But the edge is a very different colour. It's a brown sort of colour, which signifies that I've tempered it to the right temperature. This will probably show on the grinder or with a file, because now the file does sort of catch ever so slightly, which is what you want. So this is now ready for the final grind, polish, harden. Which I might do in this video actually. Stay put. Did I just say grind, polish and harden? Final grind, polish and sharpen is what I should have said. If I said that. You've got to be very careful, because now that it's tempered, I've got to be careful not to overheat it. So when this edge gets very thin, you've got to make sure you keep keeping it cool, so otherwise it will temper under the heat of the grinder. Now the reason I like this blade is there's not too much finishing to on it, there's not much grinding, which I like. So I dislike grinding. Some people will tell you that you should be wearing gloves for this. Don't. When you've got something rotary like this, the last thing you want to be doing is wearing gloves that could get sucked in. Okay, there's our sharpened edge. So now I'm going to go over the rest of it with the wire wheel, and that'll give it quite a nice kind of polished black finish, which is what I'm going for. Okay, so this is what we're left with. I'm rather happy with that. So we've got this kind of, I don't know how well this shows on here, so I might overlay a picture on which I've taken with a proper camera. We've got kind of a shiny black finish here, which shows off the kind of metal texture, the forged texture of the original Locke knife, and with the kind of shiny sharpened edge, which I'll be it's rather sharp. I'll be giving that a go over with the whetstone. So it's looking pretty nice. So all that remains now is to make the wooden handle to go on, and to make the crossguard, which I'll be forging. So it's looking pretty good, I'd say. I'm hoping to get this done. I really should have thought about the height, shouldn't I? If I kneel, I'm down here. If I kind of stand, I'm up here. So I want to kind of squat. So yeah, basically, I'm hoping to get this done. I'm going on holiday the week after next. So I want to get it done before then, so I can get the final video done and do a bit of testing, chop some stuff maybe, you know. Spoilers. Okay, so I'll call it a day there, and look forward to the next video. Yes, that's right, look forward to, I'm telling you to look forward. You've got no choice on this. You've got to look forward to the next video, because whether you like it, it's coming. Okay, right, see you guys later.